Well, hello and welcome to Work Cookie, our weekly gathering of IOs, HRs, OCs, recruiters, and one actor, as we try to make the world of work just a little bit better. Uh, Hello, Heather. Heather Morton's going to be leading the discussion today, and we're going to focus on the phantom employee, exploring absenteeism and ghosting behaviors. Um, you know what? I might have been that employee occasionally in the last, few decades. But is it, I mean, we've all heard of like quiet quitting and all that stuff going on. Is this something that's always been with us, or is it something we're seeing more of today?
Well, I think in general, no, we've always had it. There are different types of absenteeism. So we do have like planned absenteeism, but also we have others. So like unplanned or chronic, where people are calling out multiple times a week or month. And so in this case, with the ghosting aspect, I figured for the month of October, we are close to Halloween, so we can talk about more like Halloween themed like stuff. I will give a shout out to Ryan Ruffiner. He is the one that had that idea. And so for this week, we'll talk about unplanned or chronic absenteeism.
Sounds good. Now, has there been a lot of research into this, or is it something that we're just sort of now going, oh, maybe we should look at this?
Well, it's interesting that you say that. So I am really big into understanding AI lately.
Hmm.
And so I was looking at research. I'm actually going to go ahead and post it in the chat box for those that want to look. So it's going to go right now. There is some research by Ali Shaw et al., which is from 2020, and they used deep neural network for predicting workplace absenteeism. And so if you're familiar with deep neural network, so we have AI, so think of it like an umbrella. Underneath that is machine learning, so that's a subset. And then another subset, so under machine learning is this deep neural network. And so they had, I want to say it was 17 different types of factors that they fed the deep neural network to predict accurately, like a very high, like 90% accuracy on predicting absenteeism. And some of these were like the reason for the absence, but even BMI, height, weight, if you're a social drinker or social smoker, can be a factor in whether or not you are absent.
How? I mean, I've got to have a smoke, so I'm not coming in today.
It was more so if you are familiar with machine learning, it takes this vast amount of data and it uses it to make correlations and patterns, which can then make predictions on certain things. So, like if we're giving it so many different types, I think it had 700 different participants who were going through looking at all of these reasons. So, sex, age, smoker, drinker, whatever it was, and then seeing whether or not they're absent or not. And then it went through with like months that were more absent or days of the week that there were more absences. And so it was able to
So,
make these predictions.
so if I'm looking to put a team of five people together, can
Mhm.
I look at their current, history with the organization and decide who may be good candidates for the team and who might not be?
Oh, so you're like tipping into that it could get unethical if we
Yeah, that's me.
yes. So that was actually one of the limitations in the study. It was talking about so like implications is we should not, let's say we want those five people. And
Yeah.
I say, oh man, based on what I fed this deep neural network, it's showing that you are likely to be absent. I'm not gonna hire you for this team. So I think using this kind of information is wonderful. Technology can be amazing, but we should not negate the human aspect of it. And I think it'd be great to use as a tool. Think of like using your calculator. We like to do that, but we still have the human element. I'm still writing down my math problem. I should not feed in all this data and then say, oh, based on this calculation, you're not it.
So, how
Right?
Well, okay, so yeah, and actually, like, it makes me really nervous that there's now a tool that can
Uh-huh.
look at this and start
Yeah.
to weed people out. So, how can an IO psychologist use this tool effectively
Yeah.
to improve the work conditions?
I think that's exactly what I'm thinking. So I think if we are feeding it, let's say in your workplace or in anyone's workplace, we want to give it this data, make these predictions. I think it would be great to pinpoint areas that you can focus on improving rather than making these massive changes and saying, actually, you're likely to be absent. We're going to fire you. Instead, creating the atmosphere and the culture in a way that supports better work behaviors to minimize those instances of absenteeism.
So, if I'm in leadership and I'm looking
Mhm.
at my entire organization, and I
Yeah.
notice that there's a team over here that there seems to be a lot of absenteeism, I
Hmm.
might be able to dig deeper to find out what some of the root causes are.
Yeah.
I like that.
Right.
There is a good way to use this. I see a hand up. It's
Yeah.
LindaAnn. So let's
LindaAnn.
take a stroll down there. And LindaAnn, hello.
Hello. So, as you were just going through the information, Heather, my thought was, I was based on Tom's question,
Mhm.
is so people, if you want to say you want to select a team, put them together, and you used some of that information to choose who you want, I think that that could be an adverse selection process because people might work really well for you.
Mhm.
They might be in a situation where it wasn't a good manager for them, or they
Right.
didn't like the work they were doing and things like that. And so how was that taken in consideration at all, or was it just lifestyle factors?
So it wasn't just lifestyle factors. There were some about like their workload, their day-to-day activities, but it didn't really talk about like work job fit or whether or not like it was a good like like the person job fit, whether or not they aligned and worked well with their management team. It was more so features like how far away you were from work, how many hours you worked per day, and so going forward with new studies, that could be something to take into consideration, whether or not they actually like their job, because that plays a role in it.
It makes a huge, I mean, statistics show that, people quit managers, they don't quit their jobs, right? So it depends, so if someone's really not vibing with their current manager, they could just say, yeah, I don't feel like going into work today, just it's too toxic or whatever. But
Mhm.
if they were in a different situation, that might not be the case.
You're absolutely correct. Yes.
Is there a place, Heather, where we can take this information that's going to be of real value to us? That here is some information that I'm getting that maybe I've got to decipher, maybe I've got to dig a little bit deeper. But if I'm a leader in an organization, what is the best way to use this information?
Right. So if I were, let's say, in HR or leadership, and I received this lovely data set of predictions, one, it could be overwhelming if you really don't know what to do with it. But if it were me and I were that leader or I were that HR manager, I would look at things like, okay, are there certain days of the week that they are more likely absent? Well, what's going on during those days? Because maybe there's more workload on those days than others. And then making changes to those work days based on those. Now, obviously, I cannot tell people you can't drink anymore or you can't smoke anymore. Like those are just things that like we can't do, but I could maybe offer some incentives for like let's say if they want to go and focus on their health, maybe we offer health coaches and it's complimentary. It is some sort of benefit for the workplace. You could make decisions like that.
So it can be used to improve the workload or the workplace and not just get rid of some
Right.
employees.
Right. It's definitely not one of those like let's just nix these employees.
All right. Thank you very much. Dr. Martha, let's go to you.
I think what we have to remember is that whether we're looking at ghosting behavior or whether we're considering something like quiet quitting, these are just symptoms. We need to look at the root of the problem. We have seen a lot of changes happening since the pandemic. The way we approach work, the way that people feel about where work falls within their life's reality has shifted for a lot of people. And so for organizations who insist on continuing to do the same things the same way, it's not realistic that there's going to be things missed. So when we see things such as ghosting or quiet quitting, rather than arming ourselves as an organization with AI to pinpoint the so-called bad apples, we really need to do some soul searching, if you will, in terms of what is happening within the organization. And yes, LindaAnn had mentioned that people quit managers rather than organizations. But you know what? The reality is that sometimes people quit organizations. You can have the most wonderful manager, but if the organization is not backing them up and if it's not delivering what you need, then you're going to leave despite however well you get along with your manager. So I see us talking about symptoms. I see us talk about what happened. But let's look at what is driving. There are absolutely insisting that people come back to work on site. People do the things they used to do the same way. But the mentality has shifted. There's no way of denying that. There's no way of avoiding it. Many people who maybe in the past were willing to devote their lives to their jobs, to their careers, are no longer willing to do that because the pandemic was an eye-opener for everybody. So yes, this is just another topic to discuss, but it's really just another symptoms. What is another one of the symptoms? What is happening within the organization? What is happening within the idea of working for a living in general that is bringing these new things into our reality? And I think this is where IOs come in, because organizations, they have a goal and they have an agenda. They are there to provide products and services and make a profit as a result. And that's the bottom line. People can tell you this is like a family, and people can tell you whatever they want, but if they weren't turning a profit, if they couldn't keep the lights on and the doors open, everybody would be gone. So let's be realistic about that. People have finally begun to wake up to the reality of what does me working for a living really mean? Why do I do it? What does it give to me? Is it nothing but a paycheck? Is it something that's fulfilling? And organizations really need to start paying attention to it. But realistically, what you need are people like IOs to really encourage those conversations and steer those ships, because you cannot expect an organization which is there for a reason other than to coddle their employees and make sure everybody's happy, because that's not realistic. Somebody's telling you that, they're lying. Let's just get that out of the way. Let's get some IOs in there and truly look at what's going on. Until then, we're just talking about Band-Aids.
That's well said and great advice. And, you know, it's interesting because only last night I was watching a small documentary and they were talking to millennials who basically were going, yeah, we realize the way our parents worked. We're not doing that. We're looking for much more balance in our lives. And then the interesting part was then they were talking to people in, you know, their late 40s, early 50s who were going, yeah, these kids got it right.
And that's the thing. That's the first generation that saw and learned, right? Saw what was happening and actually learned and said, no, I don't want to do that.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Thank you very much, Dr. Martha. Nick, let's go to you.
Yeah, I think there is, you know, massive shifts happening in attitudes and things like that. And even kind of the term absenteeism, you know, it kind of, to me, strikes this idea of the organization is worried about time theft. I pay you to do a job, and if you're not here, you're not being productive. And yeah, and it is a problem, you know, like Dr. Martha aptly said, organizations have a purpose, and that purpose has some economics to it. And And that's a reality we have to acknowledge. But I think that, it sounds like some of these studies maybe lumping all absentee, sickness, vacation, family emergency, company celebration. Like if it's all one bucket, then it's a wide picture. But if, you're taking it and saying, okay, what are the factors that the employee can control? Their lifestyle choices are, they're not able to come in on a Monday morning because they had a big weekend or whatever. All that. So there's, different buckets I think this could look at. I think you also have to balance the absences or missing time from work with what's the productivity when they get back. Somebody coming back from vacation, they're recharged, they're refreshed. They may have had, gone on a spiritual retreat and now they understand their purpose in the workforce. And so I think that you have to kind of balance that idea of, are we paying for somebody's time or are we paying for their contributions to the project? And I think, with salary, with an hourly wage, it's a really hard balance to strike. But I think there is with the shift and things, organizations, they rescinded control when they stopped, looking at the full employment life cycle and started looking at the bottom line. And now employees are saying, I'm taking my time back and this is what I'm willing to give to you. So, is it project? Is it hours? Is it butts and seats? It's all these sorts of things we've talked about with remote work and managers not trusting it. So, absenteeism, yes, it's a sign of a bigger problem. And if we can identify, days of the week or patterns, I think that says more about the organization than it does about the individuals. And I think that that's where it needs to be a diagnostic tool for the organization and not a predictive tool for employment down the road.
I like that a lot. And before you go to you, LindaAnn, Heather, let me bring it back to you because Nick raises some really good points there. First of all, should this just be, or is this a tool that organizations can now use? But I'm also interested because you mentioned this was 2020 when this came out, which I've learned in the IO world is like fresh, brand new information. It's not like 17 years from discovery to implementation. So is that just where we are with the research right now, or has the research that you're looking at gone deeper into some of those levels that Nick's talking about?
I actually have not looked to see if there were other neural networks or deep neural networks for it, but I did find, and I think it was the second article, where the role of mental health on absenteeism and productivity. And this is more recent in 2022. And so that's more employee focused rather than just, are you here at work or are you not? Because there's a difference between how many hours are you putting in? Because I could put in 40 hours, but not be doing anything in those 40 hours. Or am I actually on task? Is my mental health supporting that? Is my work-life balance supporting me being productive? And productivity looks different for everyone. I could be more productive in 5 hours than I am in a 40-hour work week. And so piggybacking off of Nick's, there's so many other factors to make it person-centered rather than just, hey, I have these statistics and this is what it's pointing to.
Yeah, sometimes I might look like I'm working, but I'm just playing the role of a worker. So does this mean now that as a leader, I have to be worried about my employees' emotional well-being?
Well, your employees are human. And so ideally, unless you are hiring robots, we should be focusing on the whole person at work instead of just what can you do for me in terms of getting your tasks done. Because if you're not supporting their overall sense of self, then there may be some hindrances there in the workplace.
I'm guessing if I was a CEO, if I went to automation and just hired robots, I'd probably still need an IO psychologist to come in and help everybody else deal with the fact that it's just robots now. So thank you for that, Heather. LindaAnn, let's go to you.
So just to make one comment about we're like a family statement that companies make, I would recommend you not do that. That's not the positive you really think it is. When you think about how many families do you know that function in a healthy manner? So that might be more revealing than you want it to be. So anyway, that's just my sarcastic comment on that. I was wondering if there was a correlation brought to between that information on absenteeism to employee engagement, right? Because only 20 to 30% of our employees are engaged, right? And that makes a huge difference as to how you feel about work and do you want to show up and all those kinds of things. And so I was wondering if they had looked at that correlation, like how many of the engaged employees with those lifestyles or those factors are engaging in the absenteeism, or is there a correlation between they don't give a damn anyway? And so I'm not, so I think that's an important piece to look at. I think that I can't remember what I wanted to say. So let Dr. Martha pick up the piece and I'll come back when my brain kicks back in.
Dr. Martha, over to you.
LindaAnn, I like your comments about the family. If we're all family, let me get the keys to your jet. Because after all, we're all family, right? So it should not be a problem. Yes. So Tom, you brought up an interesting idea of whether organizations really should consider the whole person as an employee. And once again, this is where the IO psychologist comes in as incredibly valuable, because our training evolves around the science of humans and human behaviors. And you cannot expect to have a purely transactional relationship and have that relationship to be at its best or at its peak. And whether we're talking about work or whether we're talking about personal relationships, I think I would like to think that everybody would know that if the only reason you're interacting with someone is to get something out of them, to have them fulfill your need, to have them make up for something that you're missing, to get something out of them that you can't get otherwise or from anywhere else, that is not a meaningful or lasting relationship. If we move that to the workplace, there has to be more to the relationship that an employee has with an employer. It doesn't have to be as deep and meaningful as a personal relationship, but because of the shifts in attitudes and what people see in terms of what does it mean for me to work for someone? Where does that fall within my life? If an organization is purely transactional, they are not concerned about your mental health. They're not concerned about your fulfillment at work. They're not concerned about what's going on in your personal life. Do you need support there? What can the organization do to help you balance work and non-work domains? So I think it's incredibly short-sighted. Yes, it's been done for hundreds of years now, but the workforce is shifting. The mentality, the psychology of people is shifting. And organizations, although they're usually late to the party, and if they go, it's kicking and screaming, it's the organizations that end up figuring out what's really going on and jumping on board that succeed and have the lowest turnover rates and have the best performers and have people wanting to work with them. So I get it that a lot of times decisions are made using the bottom line and what do we need today, and let's not worry about tomorrow, 5-10 years from now. But realistically, an organization cannot afford that. We live in a very competitive world. We are connected across the globe, both in personal ways with social media and all the technology, but also in terms of businesses. That means more competition. That means more comparison. People are talking. People know what's going on. People know who makes who makes what kind of money, what kind of support they're getting. So it would be incredibly short-sighted for an organization to continue down that old ways of doing things. And again, I don't expect organizations to become IO psychologists. That's why you bring one on board, whether it's permanently or as a consultant.
Dr. Martha, can I dig a little deeper into that with you? Because especially over about the last 6 to 8 months, what I've started to notice is organizations who are going, we care about our employees, we know training's important, but one of those outside consultants, they cost a lot of money. And we've got Joe over here, and Joe took a leadership seminar, and now we're going to get Joe to train us all and to do the leadership seminar. I actually sat in on one of those and saw a lot of people patting themselves on the back because it was reinforcing that we're all great here. There was no there was no expertise in the room. So can you talk a little bit about that as a risk factor in moving forward?
That's the thing, right? We did the minimum. We saved some money. Joe's doing the seminars. Joe's not qualified to do the seminars. And we all feel good about ourselves at the top. Our egos are boosted. The employees are disgruntled. And if we bring someone from the outside, they might tell us about our dysfunction. That's the reality for a lot of organizations. So if an organization truly wants to succeed, you have to be able to look beyond that. And if you didn't pay attention and brought an IO on board and they told you the truth and you didn't like it, you know what? Just take it for what it is. Work with them. They can help you. They can help to navigate you through whatever you're facing so that the organization, including the workforce and the leadership, comes out on the other side in a better place, in a stronger way, with better relationships and better outcomes for the business. It doesn't have to be. I think sometimes what happens with an organization, once we start talking about the well-being of the employee and taking care of the employee, either they start spewing the we're family, we're friends stuff, which is just a bunch of shysters talking, if anybody pays any attention to it, right? Or they think that, well, this is way too much. That's not our responsibility, and we don't need to get involved with that. But again, short-sighted, because you don't have to be my friend as my employer to ensure that I have a healthy, stable, inspirational place to work. And look, not everybody's going to have a job where they're inspired and then they can't get to, can't wait to go to work because they're changing the world. No, a lot of jobs are not like that. However, if you have a healthy culture and a healthy environment and allow people to come in and make a living where they can support themselves and their family, and then they have enough time to, outside of the workplace, pursue their passions, then as an employer, you've done a fabulous job. You don't have to provide them with Disney World at work, but allow them to make those decisions and navigate their own happiness within the parameters of what the workplace means for them.
Thank you very much for that, because I'm seeing a lot of functionally dysfunctional businesses out there. Thank you very much. And my guess is absenteeism would be reduced greatly if we just took some of those steps. Nick, let's go back to you.
Yeah, it's to your point. What is the organization's responsibility to the employee? And I think we can go very Pollyanna and say yes, they should absolutely take care of every facet of every person's life. But at some point, we have to acknowledge it does fall to the individual to take care of themselves. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And so, I think that's where the corporate frustration about wellness programs and all this, like, they can see the connection to the bottom line of healthier people get sick less, they cost less for insurance. And so that's a boon for them to want to do that. And that makes sense as an organization. But, you get every person in the office who, oh, it's just a silly step challenge, I'm not going to do it, or anything like that. There's a way in which you have to try and market that within the organization, that this is for our benefit, and be transparent about that. Hey, we're catching a break on premiums that we're going to pass along to you. And also, like, we want to do this because this is a way in which we can help you take care of yourself. But again, it does ultimately fall down to individual responsibility. to a point. So I would say, any initiative that an organization puts out there is great. We want, the steps for mental health and flexibility. These are the positives that are coming out of the pandemic that are becoming more and more part of benefits packages. But hopefully they're not just lip service, and hopefully they're, accessible for people to actually use. But again, then you can get everybody so close, but it comes down to a matter of personal choice. And I think that's, kind of the fundamental issue with absenteeism. I can still choose whether I come in or not. I can choose how hard I'm going to work for you. And, that at that point becomes kind of adversarial, then yes, maybe it's time to part ways, because it's a sign that the relationship isn't in the right. And that could be the organization's fault, and it could be the individual's fault. So I think, we often put the onus on organizations to do the right thing and be their best. And yes, the evidence points that when you do those things, you are more successful. But again, let's remember that the organizations are made up of individuals, and those relationships are complex and far-reaching.
Here's an actor question. If I was dating somebody and they started to ghost me, my suspicions may, be perked, and I may dig into that. But we're so willing that if an employee starts to become absent, they start ghosting you. We just kind of go, oh, well,
that's where
it's their problem. I don't have to deal with it.
There's, again, sort of responsibility for what created the situation. And also the rap that organization gets, I can go find somebody else. Like, if you want to take off, have fun. Like, I've got, thousands of applicants sitting in my ATS, and we can replace you. And so that's where we get that kind of heartless mentality. And so when organizations do the right thing and say, okay, what's creating this environment? And you may not be able to solve that problem for that particular person, but hopefully you can change the pattern. And, for the next person, it won't be quite so difficult.
Well, I've got 1,000 applicants on an app, but maybe that's my problem. Thank you very much for that, Nick. Dr. Xaulanda, good to see you again. Let's go to you.
Hi, hello everyone. I am totally geeking out over this conversation because I've definitely met my tribe. Like, this topic is so relevant to some of the work I'm doing with clients right now. And so I think, organizations and leaders really need to look at absenteeism, because it does cost money, but replacing employees also costs money. So if they're trying to tie these symptoms back to the bottom line, they're just spending more money, which is the benefit of having an IO psychologist come in or on staff to help, right? When we look at what we do, we look at the research. We've been talking about a couple of scholarly articles that Dr. Heather shared with us. And how do we apply that within the workplace, right? So if we look at through this topic through the lens of social cognitive theory, to Nick's point, there is that self, that individual, that we need to find out what's going on with that particular individual, why they may be absent. But then coming out a little bit more towards that proxy, or those individuals that are in close proximity to that person, whether it's their leader, what is that dyadic relationship like, right? Because to LindaAnn's point, yeah, people do leave organizations because of their managers, but there may be other things that's going on there that can help to solidify that relationship, as well as their relationship with their team, right? Or their department, or their relationship with the larger organization. What does the organizational culture value? Not necessarily the values that they put up on the wall, right? Because I've gone into many trainings, I've asked employees and leaders, what are your values? And when they rattle it off, it's very different than what's posted on the wall, because we become desensitized or blind to it, because what we're actually experiencing within the organization is very different than what the marketing material and all the glossy stuff looks like, right? So I think for addressing this particular topic of absenteeism and ghosting, it really requires a multifaceted approach to look at it from the individual, from the leadership and that dyadic relationship, their team, the entire organization. What are the job characteristics that that employee is having to work within? talking about person job fit, right? What are their personal characteristics? What are the organizational characteristics? And then looking at all of those variables and bringing them together and saying, what are contributing to why that person might be absentee or ghosting the organization? So it really does take that multifaceted approach.
Let me ask you this, because we focus on IO psychology, but I remember when I was teaching in post-secondary, working with young acting students, I was on a first name basis with all of our clinical psychologists, and we at one point we asked for, could we get a dedicated psychologist just for our students? And I know that there are some organizations which are now starting to employ clinical psychologists to work with their employees. Is that a growing trend? Because from where I sit, that's a really good idea.
I'm not sure if it's a growing trend, because back to our point of the bottom line, organizations need to see the benefit of bringing those individuals in. However, as there are more growing conversations about mental health and our understanding and removing the stigma surrounding mental health, they may see where it's beneficial to bring in a clinical psychologist to help their team.
Thank you very much for that. LindaAnn, let's go back to you.
So I too enjoy this conversation a lot. And I want to come back to the comment that you made, Tom, about, do we have to care about our employees' emotional health? It's like, yeah, you do. And that goes to the emotional intelligence piece, right? And so I have the privilege, absolute privilege in one of my clients to work with a team of young female leaders, right? And they're engineers. And so one of the, as I do the leadership development piece, I'm starting with things that are not in your typical leadership program profile, right? And so we're going through like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Do you know where your employees fall on that hierarchy? And these are engineers, right? So they were in STEM. They never got the humanities stuff. So they need to understand what that is. And so we did that a week or two ago. And then I went through some emotional intelligence information this week, and it was so appropriate because we had two particular issues. One was that there was one particular employee who was having a very negative effect on the entire team because of his lack of emotional intelligence and abilities. And so then, as the consultant, I had the elephant in the room conversation with that person. And that's made a difference, at least in the short term so far. But the other piece was then another employee leader had someone who just broke up with his girlfriend and got thrown out of his apartment and all those kinds of things. And now she's looking at this information. She goes, oh man, he's already down here on Maslow's hierarchy. And this is what's going on with him emotionally and all those kinds of things. And so it's important to have that ability to see where your people are and the kind of effect that they are having on the culture and the ability for everybody to feel good about the environment. Because the one employee was having people, when he came in and he was salty, it affected the entire team. They felt like they were on eggshells. And so the whole environment has changed. And that's just two people in a small organization, but that could be any department in a large organization. And so, yeah, those pieces they infiltrate everything.
Well, while this change is going on, we've been teaching leadership for a very long time, but are we still teaching it the same way, or is the way leadership is being taught changing as well to include emotional intelligence? And I mean, I think of, Dale Carnegie was teaching what he was calling leadership. It was really communication skills, back 40 years ago. And those skills are still, important, but do we have to maybe adjust the focus of leadership training and make it really centered on the individual in the organization and not just if you're a leader, it's the organization first and the employees come in somewhere down the line?
Oh, I mean, yes, the leadership training is focusing somewhat more on emotional intelligence. I don't know how well they're really integrating it into the zeitgeist of any particular organization, but there's movement to that. But the way I approach it and help people understand is, and I call it kind of down and dirty leadership, right? Every interaction with you that you have as a leader with your employees is an individualized interaction, right? The way you're going to work with this person is not the same as what you need to do with this other person over here, because they have different motivational factors, they have different preferences, all those kinds of things. So everything as a leader needs to be on an individualized basis, because just sitting back in your ivory tower corner office and spewing out things that let's communicate well, that doesn't necessarily translate to an individual.
Right, very true. Thank you very much for that. Nick, over to you.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, to be a leader, you have to have people following you. And when you have the time to take the empathy and the situational awareness to look at that individual situation, that's typically a person that people are going to want to be around and listen to and have influence. I was going to draw attention to the comment in the chat that, the CDC has this study where they've lost $225.8 billion. I always struggle with studies like that because there's a potential there. And I get that, organizations forecast and things like that, but at some point it's imaginary money. It's what could have been. And so because they didn't take care of the problem, they didn't lose anything. They just didn't make the gains that they were expecting. And I wrestle with some of these big dollars because they're big, scary numbers. And oh my goodness, my bottom line is so impacted. But, like my household budget, I have to know what money's coming in and what money's going out in order to, forecast and all of that. Emergencies come up and all that. But I think that the idea that, organizations just get to say, okay, well, we forecasted that we're going to make this amount of money because this person was in place. And because that person had a family emergency and they were out and a deadline was missed or whatever, you can trace some of those things to direct causes. But much like employee well-being has ripples much beyond the financial factor, I think some of these other things have kind of that inverse effect where the bottom line impacts the individual as well. So some of that interplay always makes me kind of wonder, and I probably should sit down with an economist and figure out why they're, dealing with some of these things, because that's a blind spot for me. But very much feels like they're forgetting that it's people that run organizations and nothing is quite guaranteed.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much, Nick. Dr. Martha, back to you.
So I like Linda's example with the specific person whose attitude was affecting the team. I have come across something similar. It was rather severe. It was a young man who was fighting with his girlfriend, and it was really affecting the team because he was fighting with his girlfriend for the entire workday on the phone. Not only was he not doing work, which the other team members did not appreciate, they were picking up the slack, but he was disrupting the environment. They had to be in the middle of this battle that he was having. That's part of his personal life. So now, that brought up a lot of questions from the organization. What is our responsibility? What are we allowed to do? What are we supposed to do? When you think about, yes, we want to support the individual employee, but back to Nick's earlier point, as an individual employee, you also have certain responsibilities. You're a grown-up with a job. Let's start with that. There are some things you do and some things you don't do at work. And the bottom line is, as much as that organization struggled, they didn't know what to do. Are we prying if we try to support this person? How about our responsibility to the other employees, the rest of the team? So this idea of emotional intelligence as part of leadership training and as part of just being a leader of an organization is tremendous, because there will come a time when you as a leader, when you as an organization may potentially be facing disruptive behaviors from individuals, eh, behaviors that are affecting the team, behaviors that the person really has no business exhibiting at work in terms of professionalism, but they did anyway. And now you have to figure out what to do. So that's very real. That's very real. I like that LindaAnn brought that up, because that's very real. And a lot of people simply, just because you're a leader, just because you, whether it's an appointed position that you were hired for, or because you're a natural leader and people follow you, does not mean that you have the training and the knowledge of what to do in those tough situations. And that's something that I think a lot of organizations miss, because we hope it doesn't happen, or when it does, we hope it goes away.
Very true. Thank you very much for that. Arlene, hello, nice to see you. Let's go to you.
Hi, thank you. And I just wanted to touch back on the organizational culture, which is a really great point. It's not just about what the organization values, but its subcultures too. Is there a different culture within the department, even within the offices? And then implementing the employee engagement programs. Employee engagement is critical in reducing this issue. Engaged employees are generally more committed and less likely to take unnecessary time off, and developing those programs often fosters a sense of belonging and significance in employees' workers, can lead to higher attendance rates. But to Linda's point, one size does not fit all, and these training programs that are often created should be tailored to those leaders for those specific departments or areas that they're going to be leading, because oftentimes they are not the same problems that other departments are facing.
I agree with that, but I want to go back to that little culture bit, because it's one of those phrases, organizational culture. What's the culture in our team? It's sort of thrown around like we all understand what we're talking about. But I often get the feeling that, unless you're an IO psychologist, you don't really know what you're talking about. So when we are talking about organizational culture, how do we bookmark that or frame that so that we're all on the same page? Arlene, any suggestions?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Oh, sure. So culture is, because we talk about culture a lot on Work Cookie, and people may be listening and we all kind of assume that we're talking about the same thing, but we might not be. So when we're looking at organizational culture, how do we frame that in such a way that we're all on the same page? We all have the same general understanding about what we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like a lot of times with these surveys that we release through employee engagement, we're able to understand like what everybody is getting from these values that we say that we are implementing as an organization. One way to understand is by observing how decisions are made, how leaders are acting, and how employees communicate. Because do people feel comfortable speaking up? Is collaboration really encouraged, or is there more of a competitive area within departments? And I would say like those are ways in terms of being able to understand. Also, another thing to consider in some cultures is that they exist within different teams and departments, but understanding why. Is there like a formal approach, while maybe some other departments are more creative? And so there is going to be needed that subculture, but at the end of the day is understanding these dynamics, and they can help us tailor initiatives for these types of programs.
Thank you very much for that. Heather, I want to come back to you, because that does raise another question on absenteeism, where, if I didn't feel like I was part of the culture, or if my ethnic culture even was not, my perception was other people on the team are uncomfortable because I've got a culture that's different from theirs. And, we've gone through a lot of that through the last 100 years. It's hopefully getting better, but there's still issues out there. So how much is the culture of the organization affecting absenteeism?
I'm muted. Okay, I'm back. Oh, I just saw comment from Imani. I am the absent employee and ghosted. Hi, everyone. Welcome on. So in terms of culture, I'm actually writing a whole lesson plan right now for a university about how culture and cultural differences can impact how people work together because, we all have our own beliefs, our values, our perspectives on things, and how we approach work. And so what I might think is normal or my norm may contradict someone else's or offend them or not align with their stuff. And so if you're in a culture, and if we're thinking of the organization's culture, and let's boil it down to like my team's culture, if we don't have some sort of unanimous approach, or if we're not welcoming other perspectives and approaches, we could be inadvertently contributing to people not feeling a sense of belonging, not feeling like they can be themselves in this workplace, which could contribute to things like stress and anxiety and things like psychological safety. If I feel like I can't bring things to the table without being judged, then why am I here? Why am I going to continue coming in if I can't be myself? So it can play a big role.
And we've often talked about employees feeling like they're part of something larger than themselves, that they're contributing to something. If I create that culture, won't absenteeism might not vanish, but isn't it going to be reduced greatly?
Right. Like we should look at studies on that. But in general, if you feel like you are part of a team, if you're accepted, if you're not feeling that stress surrounding your workplace, you can have outside, like personal things happening because we can't help if we're sick or if we're dealing with some sort of family situation. But if it's not pinpointed at work, that might not be that contributing factor causing you.
I need to feel the love. If I don't feel the love, I'm not coming to work today. I like that. Thank you very much, LindaAnn. Over to you.
Boy, you're on it today, Tom. I tell you. I think that one of the things that we need to understand about like the aspect of culture for employees and that how it contributes to employee engagement and they're possibly influencing that absenteeism is to understand that as a leader, whatever team you're leading and as leaders of entire organizations, is every time you hire a new employee, you influence your culture. It's just like making a casserole and adding a new ingredient. Some of those new ingredients will make it taste better. Some of them will go, yeah. Okay. And so you have to really pay attention to that all the time. It's not you can't just say, here's our culture when we have 10 employees and then expect it to be the same culture when you're 50. It's not going to, that's a hard take, right? And so you have to also include, when you were talking about the diversity and whatever, that diversity can really make the culture far more rich and actually more productive. So being able to understand that and do what it takes as a leader to monitor, influence, and foster the growth, the healthy growth of that is a challenge and a responsibility of your leadership. I think that one of the things, I can't remember quite who said it, but it was no Band-Aids allowed, right? So that was one. I was working with a group of consultants and we were developing the kind of the outline of our program. And our general philosophy was we're not going to work with a company who just wants a Band-Aid, right? They want you to do this employee engagement and do the survey and then slap on whatever party or ping pong table or whatever, day off or whatever that you need to fix that engagement problem. And that's not going to do it, right? Engagement is a result. It's not a thing. And so, it's important for leaders to understand how integrated all these pieces really are. You can't just do one thing and expect it to have this global influence. You have to do all these pieces because they're so intricately integrated.
Thank you very much for that. Dr. Martha, over to you.
Going back to culture, I think it's important to remember that it's not something that's defined in writing. We can see the mission statements and we can see the goals and all that, some of which are spot on, some of which are nothing more than, as Dr. Xaulanda said, laminated posters right on the walls. But culture really has to be experienced. It has to be something that you experience, that you listen to the feedback from the people who are immersed in that culture day in and day out as employees. Because leadership may have an idea of a culture or may have a delusion of a culture, but it's not until you talk to the people who experience it and live it on a daily basis. Those are the people who can better define a culture, but also individuals should be able to ideally say whether or not that culture works for them, whether they feel like they're a good fit for that culture. There's nothing wrong with not being a good fit with a culture. It's just people, we're all different. But it's important to remember that piece because we're looking at bringing together a number of people, not all of whom are going to be the same. Maybe you luck out and you have nothing but engineers and they went to similar schools and they have similar backgrounds and similar families and whatever. But the reality is that most organizations do have a wide variety of people that come together that then have to find a way of working within an organization's culture. So that is something that is very important for an organization, whether or not they realize it, to not only know what the culture is, but also to be very active in creating a certain culture and maintaining a certain culture. Because like LindaAnn said, you can add one ingredient and it can throw off your whole dish. Well, you know what? It's the organization's responsibility to make sure we have a stable culture that moves forward with us. And if changes occur, we can account for that and still remain a healthy culture for the organization and the workforce.
Do a lot of organizations now, are they starting to think about, I've got a CEO. Do I need a cultural person in that C-suite, the leader of culture?
Well, culture comes from the top. Because whether it's the things you foster and promote and make happen, or whether you're an absentee landlord in that sense, that let them do whatever they want, it doesn't affect me. I'm over here just collecting my fat paycheck, right? So it all comes from the top, whether you're active or inactive. If an organization has a group of leaders who are on point, maybe they don't need anybody specific, but maybe they do. It will vary by organization. The point is to ask those questions and act accordingly, not to provide the Band-Aids that LindaAnn won't give you anyway, but rather to find real solutions.
So bringing in a psychologist and no, they don't carry Band-Aids. I like that. Thank you very much. We're going to get to our last two speakers. Just to let you both know, we're kind of short on time, so try and keep succinct. Dr. Xaulanda, over to you.
Hi, I echo a lot of what everyone has been saying. I like to think of the organizational culture as something that is dynamic. It is not static. And I often use the analogy of an orchestra. You have all these musicians playing different instruments, but they need to come together and make beautiful music together. To LindaAnn's point, if they aren't doing the deep dive and not applying a Band-Aid, they're going to hurt your ears. You're going to feel it when you go into that organization, and you're not going to want to go in, which is going to contribute to that absenteeism and that ghosting. But if they can make beautiful music together, then everybody is kind of singing off the same sheet of music. But remember, organizational culture is not static. It's very dynamic. It's something that has to be intentional, not only from the leadership standpoint, but each and every person within the organization has a role and a responsibility in shaping that organizational culture. So that's my last point.
I love that because we just need to fine tune a lot of organizations, and we'll get there. Hello, Imani. Let's go to you.
Hi, I think I'm just going to have my 2 cents here to just real be quick and speak about emotional intelligence here. Because I love everyone's point here on the last minute. I love how they say that leadership comes, everything has to start from the top, and being aware that we are all different. But if there's no things like acknowledging all these things, whereby people also kind of like have that kind of awareness and understanding that everyone is important, because sometimes we do know our top people's importance, but there's a way that they also look down on people who are under them, and they feel like they have to really massage their feelings and also play to the tones of their ego, and also themselves on the top feeling so entitled, because that the word title sometimes, like we talked about here on the podcast, sometimes that titles really breed they breed entitlement, whereby they feel like if they have the leadership roles, they should treat these employees anyhow without even kind of like blending in with them. So I feel like emotional intelligence, it will give them that regulation of whereby you are so settled in with your own, you're confident in the work that you do, but at the same time, you don't even mind giving that space to other people and the differences that they really have, that you acknowledge them, and also kind of like blending, like how somebody has said, in tune, and then make that beautiful music. So I feel like emotional intelligence is still something that we really need to really get back to, so that most of us build that, so that we don't operate under, in spaces of us being triggered, our egos being triggered because of the titles that we really move around within the organizations. And so that most of us can be so regulated and also keep our eyes on the goal, which is that we are all here to be the team. And then we are all here to just kind of like contribute to this organization, and then just get away with what our main goal is in the first place, so that we don't always forget that and get into our own emotions, so that we can all just be like a mismanaged culture place. So I'll just be quick and just say that, but I feel like emotional intelligence is going to be a very good part to building a very a good culture in a workplace.
I agree 100%. And, we should maybe sometime in the next few months really focus on emotional intelligence and update that maybe a little bit. So thank you very much for that, Imani. Heather, great show, lovely conversation, great comments. We talked about ghosts this week. Next week, I think we're talking about zombies. Want to give us a little preview on that?
Yeah. So next week will be about exploring presenteeism, or having people come to the workplace but not really be all there.
Quiet quitting? Is it quiet quitting?
It can be similar to quiet quitting, yes.
Okay.
Also affects that productivity, team morale, employee behavior, all that fun stuff.
Right.
So if you're hungry for brains,
Yeah.
next week, because there's lots of brains on Work Cookie. We have lots to spare. Thank you very much, Heather. Great show once again. Thank you, everybody, for contributing. It's always so fascinating when we've got such intelligent people and you share your thoughts with us. So thank you very much for that, Heather. Thank you once again. And thank you, everybody. And Heather, if you want to count us out, we'll see everyone back here in 7 days' time.
Yes. All right. We'll see you soon. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.